I used to think grief was the sharpest pain a heart could know. When my father died, I believed the ache would come from learning to live without his steady voice, his hand on my shoulder, his faith in me. But I was wrong. The real wound came from the man I had vowed to spend my life with, the man who at my most fragile moment showed me a face I had never seen before. My name is Lauren Caldwell. I'm 36 years old, and for most of my life I thought I was lucky. I had a career that kept me steady, a father who was my anchor after my mother died young, and a husband, Andrew, who swept me off my feet with charm and confidence. For a long time, I thought I had built a life anyone would envy. But when my father passed, that illusion crumbled. He left me everything he had built: Caldwell West, the company he started from nothing, the properties, the accounts, all of it. $35 million in inheritance. It should have felt like security, a legacy, a blessing. Instead, it felt like a tombstone. Money didn't bring him back. It only deepened the hollow ache in my chest. I was still processing it when Andrew came home one night, saw the document spread across the coffee table, and gave a low whistle. "So it's true. It's really all yours." His eyes didn't look at me with love. They glittered with something else, something sharp and cold. "We should probably talk about what to do with it. Maybe buy that place in Aspen. And of course we need to figure out how much to give to Mom." At first I laughed. I thought it was a joke. But Andrew didn't laugh. His face was serious, almost expectant. "Half right," he pressed. "Half to his mother. Evelyn, the woman who had never hidden her disdain for me. The woman who left my father's funeral before the service was even over. The woman who had whispered at our rehearsal dinner that I didn't look like CEO material. "Andrew," I said, my voice shaking, "this isn't a lottery win. It's my father's legacy. Why would I give half of it to your mother?" His expression hardened, his tone sharpening into something I had never heard directed at me before. "Don't be selfish, Lauren. She's family." "She's your family," I whispered, "not mine." That was the first crack. The moment I saw him, not as my husband, but as a stranger. My father once told me grief doesn't change people, it reveals them. In that moment I understood what he meant. It didn't stop there. The next day, Evelyn herself called me, her voice sweet as syrup. "Lauren, sweetheart," she cooed. "I heard the wonderful news. Your father was such a smart man. I thought maybe we could sit down and talk numbers. Investments, maybe even a new place for myself. Nothing extravagant, just something tasteful." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles went white. "I lost my father less than a week ago, and you want to talk about numbers?" She didn't miss a beat. "He would want you to take care of family. That's what good daughters and good wives do." With a trembling but steady voice I answered, "With all due respect, Evelyn, you are not my family. You're not entitled to a cent of this money." The silence on the other end was short but sharp, like a knife before the strike. Then she snapped, venom dripping through the line. "You always thought you were too good for us. Let's see how long you last when you're all alone, sweetheart." She hung up, leaving me shaking not from fear, but from rage and betrayal. That night, Andrew slammed his fork on the dinner table, glaring at me. "You had no right to speak to my mother that way," he spat. "And she had no right to ask for my father's money," I shot back. His face twisted. "She's my only family, and I won't let you treat her like garbage just because you got a windfall." I looked at him across the table, my eyes burning. "This isn't a windfall, Andrew. It's a grave. My father died, and instead of mourning with me, you and your mother are treating it like a lottery ticket." He had no answer. His silence told me everything. From that night forward, I knew the life I thought I had was gone. I was living with strangers. Strangers who wore familiar faces but spoke in demands, in greed, in betrayal. And I realized that the only person I could rely on to protect my father's legacy was me. The days that followed blurred together, each one heavier than the last. My grief had not even begun to heal when I found myself defending my father's memory, his choices, and his legacy against the two people who should have been by my side. Instead of comfort, I received pressure. Instead of love, I felt surrounded by vultures. Andrew became relentless. Every evening, he would circle back to the topic of money. He dressed it up with words like family responsibility and sharing blessings, but the undertone was always the same. His mother was entitled to half of my inheritance, Evelyn's half. One night, as we sat on the couch, He slid a glossy real estate brochure across my lap. "Look at this," he said, excitement flickering in his eyes. "It's perfect for Mom. A villa near Palm Springs. Gated, secure, plenty of space. She'd finally feel taken care of." I stared at the pictures of the house, the sparkling pool, the manicured lawn. My throat tightened. "This is nearly $10 million," I whispered. So his voice was sharp. "You can afford it. Why let the money just sit in an account when it could change someone's life?" I looked at him, tears stinging my eyes. "What about my life, Andrew? What about the hole in my chest from losing my father? Doesn't that matter more than a villa for your mother?" For the first time, I saw something ugly twist in his expression, something beyond greed. It was disdain. He looked at me as though I were nothing but an obstacle, a stingy child keeping her toys to herself. "You're unbelievable," he muttered, standing up. "Dad always said you were spoiled. Now I see it's true." The words cut deeper than I expected. Spoiled. My father had worked every day of his life to build what he left me. I had stood by his side through hospital visits, boardroom battles, sleepless nights. I had earned his trust, his pride. Spoiled, no. I was his daughter. His choice. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Andrew's steady breathing beside me. I thought of my father's voice, the last conversation we had before his health declined. He had taken my hand, squeezed it, and whispered, "Be careful, Lauren. Not everyone who smiles at you has your best interest at heart." I realized then that he had seen this coming. The next morning, I went into his study, my study now. I opened the heavy oak desk that still smelled faintly of his cologne. Inside, I found folders, contracts, and a letter addressed to me. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. "Lauren," it began in his careful handwriting. "I know you will face pressure when I am gone. People will tell you to be generous with what I have built. Remember, this generosity without respect is theft in disguise. Protect what is yours. Protect what I entrusted to you. Love, Dad." I pressed the letter to my chest, tears spilling down my face. It was as if he were still guiding me, still shielding me from the storm. When I came downstairs, Andrew was on the phone with Evelyn. His voice was low but urgent. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll convince her. She'll come around. She has to." I stopped in the hallway, unseen, my heart pounding. She has to. That was how he saw me, not as a wife with agency, not as a grieving daughter, but as a vault he needed to crack open. That evening, I told him I needed space. I packed a small bag and drove to a hotel across town. When he called, I let it ring. When he texted, I left it unanswered. I needed clarity, distance, the quiet to think. At the hotel bar, I met with Danielle, my oldest friend and a corporate attorney. When I told her everything, the pressure, the demands, the real estate brochure, her face darkened. "Lauren," she said, her voice calm but firm, "you need to protect yourself legally. Now, before they try something reckless." "What do you mean?" I asked, my hands trembling around my glass. She leaned closer. "If Andrew is this desperate, he and Evelyn might attempt to claim a right to your inheritance. They can't, not legally, but they might fabricate something: mental instability, undue influence. We need to make sure the paperwork is airtight. We need to anticipate the attack before it comes." Her words chilled me. An attack. That's what this had become: a battle, one my father had warned me of, one I now had to face head on. I went back to the hotel room that night and sat by the window, staring at the city lights. My marriage was unraveling before my eyes. My father's voice echoed in my mind, steady and firm: "Protect what is yours." And for the first time in weeks, I felt something besides grief. I felt resolve. If Andrew and Evelyn wanted a war over my inheritance, then a war they would get. Danielle didn't have to wait long to be right. 2 mornings later, a courier in a gray windbreaker appeared at my door, his clipboard slick with drizzle. He asked for my signature, and when I shut the door again, the envelope felt heavier than paper should. Inside, there was the thud of something ruthless: a petition filed by Evelyn, an interested spouse, Andrew, requesting an emergency injunction to freeze marital assets, along with a motion to appoint a temporary conservator for me until the widow's grief stabilizes. They wrote those words like a diagnosis. They aimed them like a dart at the softest part of me. The motion leaned on 3 pillars: that I was emotionally compromised, that I was at risk of reckless spending, and that it was in the family's interest for Evelyn to manage a portion of the estate for the time being. Attached was a sworn affidavit from a Dr. Oliver Keats, who claimed he'd evaluated me after my father's death and found me unfit to independently manage large windfalls. I read it twice, my hands trembling. I had never met the man. I sat on the living room rug, the petition splayed like an injury across the coffee table. I thought of Andrew's voice on the phone, low and urgent. She has to. I thought of Evelyn's sugar-sweet tone. Good daughters and good wives take care of family. Rage rose hot and unsteady, but grief was there too, humming underneath like a bruise. I wanted my father. I wanted his hand on my shoulder. Instead, I had his pen strokes on a letter and Danielle on speed dial. She came over within the hour, rain caught in her hair, eyes already dissecting every line of the filing. "We'll answer this point by point," she said, voice steady. "We'll move to dismiss. We'll demand the doctor appear. And we'll put your inheritance behind firewalls Evelyn can't even pronounce." That afternoon, we moved fast. Danielle's firm established a separate, irrevocable trust for the estate assets with a corporate trustee, my control preserved by design, the spendthrift clauses ironclad. We recorded every transfer with timestamps. We kept copies in 3 places. By dusk, the money my father had spent a lifetime building was sitting behind marble and steel, and the only keys were mine and the trustees'. Still, fear has a way of whispering from the corners. I lay awake that night next to an empty spot where my husband used to sleep. He'd decided to give us both some space, which meant he was at Evelyn's, and listened to the house breathe. When the wind scraped a branch along the siding, I startled. When the heater clicked to life, I flinched. Grief makes you porous. Betrayal pours through. In the morning, Danielle called with her first piece of good news. "Oliver Keats is not a licensed psychologist," she said. "He lost his license 6 years ago for falsifying evaluations for cash. He's been operating as a consultant under a different LLC ever since." There was a small smile in her voice. "Guess who wired him $15,000 last month?" The answer arrived like thunder: Evelyn. We tightened our net. Danielle hired a forensic accountant to run the bank trails and a private investigator to canvass Keats's office. I returned to my father's study looking for steadier ground and found something I had somehow missed: a second, narrower drawer hidden beneath the primary one, its latch tucked under a lip of carved oak. My heartbeat quickened as I eased it open. Inside was an old manila folder labeled in my father's careful block letters, EV 1997 personnel. I read, sitting on the floor, the wood warm under my knees, the house quiet as a church. Evelyn's name appeared again and again: a hiring form, a disciplinary memo, a series of emails printed the year before I left for college. She had worked in payroll at Caldwell West. Funds went missing, numbers didn't reconcile. There were internal notes about access credentials used after hours. There was a security still grainy, dated, of Evelyn leaving the building with a banker's box at close to midnight. The last document was a separation agreement signed and notarized with a clause I recognized instantly: a promise never to return to the premises or seek employment or remuneration from the company or its principals. There was a note paperclipped to the top in my father's handwriting: "If she resurfaces, remember, thieves don't retire. They rename." The folder trembled in my hands. A history I'd never known folded itself open like a map. My father had drawn a line from his past to my present so precisely, I felt both protected and pierced. I called Danielle and read to her until my voice shook. She was very quiet when I finished. Then she said, "This is motive pattern and impeachment material in one. Your father just handed us a spine." 2 days later, we were served with a hearing date for the injunction. Andrew texted that night, "We can avoid court if you do the right thing." The right thing was a number typed in the next bubble: 17,500,000, with a little celebration emoji that made my stomach turn. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred, then typed back a single sentence: "Stop contacting me. Speak to my counsel." His reply came fast and vicious: "You'll regret this." I set the phone face down and let the words die there. On the morning of the hearing, the courthouse smelled faintly of floor wax and rain-soaked wool. I dressed in my father's favorite color, deep navy, and tucked his letter into my bag like a talisman. In the hallway, I saw them before they saw me. Evelyn in pearls that flashed like teeth. Andrew in a suit I had paid for standing too close to his mother, their heads bent together, like conspirators. When Evelyn finally lifted her eyes, her smile was sugar and salt. I felt my pulse rise, and then strangely steady. People reveal themselves, Dad had said. They were revealing themselves in real time. Inside, their attorney spoke first, weaving a story where I was a fragile widow, erratic, possibly influenced by hostile advisors. He held up Keats's affidavit like a holy card. He used the word unstable 3 times and family 6. Every syllable was a hand reaching for my pockets. Then Danielle stood and the temperature of the room seemed to change. She didn't raise her voice. She simply laid down facts like bricks. She introduced the trust, the timelines, the law that kept my inheritance separate. She slid the personnel file across to the clerk with the care of someone placing a crown back in its velvet cradle. "This is Ms. Caldwell's late father's archive," she said softly, and I watched Evelyn's jaw twitch. It documents a prior relationship between petitioner Evelyn Hart and Caldwell West Employment, cash discrepancies, termination for cause, and a signed agreement never to seek benefit from this family again. A murmur snapped through the gallery. The judge looked up. Evelyn went very still, a statue of herself with fury trapped under glass. Andrew's eyes flickered, the first crack in a mask he'd worn for years. Danielle wasn't done. She called our licensed psychologist to rebut Keats's ghost. She placed Keats's disciplinary record into evidence. She played a short audio clip the investigator had retrieved of Evelyn instructing him over speakerphone to make her look incapable. Hearing Evelyn's voice in that cold fluorescent light felt like standing in a doorway during a storm. The wind of it shuddered through me, and then left me clearer. The judge recessed for lunch, his face unreadable, and the hallway emptied into murmurs and wet umbrellas. I stood at the window and watched the rain rinse the city, the drops racing like silver nerves. Danielle touched my elbow. "No matter what he says after lunch," she murmured, "you've already done the bravest part. You chose to protect yourself." I nodded, my throat tight. Brave didn't feel like a shine. It felt like holding a line with shaking hands. In the reflection of the glass, I saw Evelyn watching me from the opposite wall, a study in polished rage. She mouthed a sentence I couldn't hear, but somehow understood. "You should have shared." And there it was, the religion of her life, the temple where she'd placed her faith. I turned from the window and met her eyes, and I didn't look away. When the judge returned from recess, the room seemed to tighten. The sound of shuffling papers, the clearing of throats, it all faded under the gravity of what was about to be decided. I sat with my father's letter in my lap, my fingers tracing the edges, grounding myself in his words. Evelyn's lawyer spoke again. His tone clipped, a touch of desperation seeping through. "Your Honor, the so-called personnel file is decades old. It's irrelevant, prejudicial," but the judge raised a hand. "It establishes character and motive. It stays." His voice was final, immovable. I saw Evelyn's lips press so tight the color drained from them. Andrew leaned toward her, whispering something I couldn't hear, but his knuckles were white against the table. Danielle rose one last time, her composure flawless. "Your Honor, this case isn't about generosity, grief, or family responsibility. It's about whether a woman legally entitled to her inheritance must surrender it because others believe they are owed. Ms. Caldwell has been painted as unstable. Yet she has presented evidence of fraud, of harassment, of a scheme designed to strip her of her rights. The question before you is simple. Will the court allow greed to disguise itself as family duty?" The silence that followed felt like an ocean before a wave. The judge's eyes swept across the room, pausing briefly on me. I held his gaze, refusing to flinch. Finally, he spoke. "Petition denied. The assets remain with Ms. Caldwell. Furthermore, I'm referring the matter of the falsified affidavit to the district attorney's office. This court does not tolerate manipulation of justice." The gavel struck, a sound like thunder, like release. My breath rushed out of me as though I'd been holding it for weeks. Evelyn shot to her feet, her pearls rattling. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice carrying across the hushed courtroom. But the judge had already risen, his robe a dark sail as he disappeared through the door. Andrew sat frozen, staring at the table as though, if he didn't move, he wouldn't have to face what had just happened. I stood my knees unsteady but my back straight. For the first time in weeks, I felt taller than the storm. Danielle gathered the files, her eyes steady on mine. "It's over," she said softly. But in truth, it wasn't over until I made it so. That evening, I drove home alone. The house was quiet, stripped of Andrew's presence. His closet stood half empty, his toothbrush gone. On the counter, he had left his wedding band, a small circle of metal that once symbolized forever. I picked it up, turned it over in my hand, and then set it back down. It was just an object now empty of meaning. The phone rang again and again that week, Andrew pleading, Evelyn raging, alternating between threats and apologies. I answered none of them. Instead, I focused on what mattered, rebuilding a life that was mine and mine alone. I returned to my father's study often, the scent of his cologne lingering like a ghost. I reread his letter until the paper softened under my touch. "Protect what is yours," he had written. I understood now that he hadn't just meant the money. He had meant me, my dignity, my peace, my sense of worth. Months passed. News of the court case spread through whispers and headlines. Evelyn's reputation cracked. Andrew's law firm quietly pushed him out, citing conflicts of interest. They had built their plans on the assumption that I would fold, that my grief would make me pliable. Instead, I had stood firm, and their empire of entitlement collapsed under its own weight. Spring arrived. The garden outside bloomed in colors my father had loved, lavender, crimson, gold. I sat on the porch one morning, coffee warming my hands, sunlight stretching across the grass. For the first time, the ache in my chest felt lighter. The grief was still there, but it no longer hollowed me. It shaped me. I realized then that revenge had not been the true victory. Vindication had, watching them unravel while I stood steady, refusing to let their greed define my story, choosing every day to live with dignity instead of drowning in bitterness. And that is what I want you to carry with you if you've walked with me through this story. Betrayal can cut deep. Family can fail you. Love can turn cruel. But you are not powerless. You are not what they tried to take. You are more. So protect what is yours, your peace, your truth, your worth. Don't let anyone disguise their greed as your obligation. Don't let anyone rewrite your story with lies. You have the right to stand tall even when it feels like the ground beneath you is crumbling. If my father were here, I think he would smile at how it ended, not with shouting, not with fists, but with quiet strength, with the knowledge that sometimes the best revenge is survival and the peace that follows when the storm finally passes. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I ask you to like this video, share it with someone who might need strength, and subscribe so we can keep telling the truths that hurt, but also heal. And please leave a comment. Tell me your story of resilience. I would love to hear it.